How's it going, my bakers? Welcome to the final episode of the cheese and bread series. Today we're making an Indian cheese and using the leftover whey to make flatbreads. So let's go to the kitchen and get started. For the third installment of the cheese and bread project series, we're going to make an Indian cheese called Paneer. And we're going to use the leftover whey to make flatbreads, Parathas. And some of the whey will also be added to the curry, which will also contain the cheese. And that is the Paneer butter masala. So we're making a full meal here, all handmade and all based on the same ingredient. The curry is fragrant, smooth and creamy, with chewy bits of cheese all throughout it, and the bread is thin, flaky and has a nice toasted flavor. And it's definitely made for this curry dish. So you can tear it up piece by piece, scoop up some curry and enjoy. The recipes are quite basic and simple, but the results are extremely tasty. So let's get right to it and let me show you how it's done. Starting with the ingredients. The cheese is as basic as it gets. I think paneer may be the easiest cheese to make, and it only contains 2 ingredients. Full fat milk and lemon juice. If you can find raw milk, use it, but do not use any of that ultra pasteurized stuff and use fresh lemon juice. For the curry, we'll need the paneer, the cheese that we're going to make. We'll need some tomatoes, onions, ginger, garlic, butter, cashew nuts, double cream, coriander. We'll use some of the leftover whey from the cheese to adjust the consistency, and of course we'll need some spices: cardamom, clove, bay leaf, cinnamon, chili powder, garam masala, ground coriander and some salt for seasoning. These are the spices used in the butter masala. You can of course adjust it to your taste. Okay, moving on to the bread. I'm using a type of Indian whole wheat flour called atta, but you can make these flatbreads with pretty much any flour. Besides that, we'll need some salt, some of the leftover whey from the cheese making process, some butter for the layers and some oil for cooking. When it comes to equipment, we'll need a pan for making the cheese and making the curry in. We'll need a bowl, a sieve and a cheesecloth for straining the cheese. I have added this to my Amazon shop, you can find a link down below the video. After we drain the cheese, we must press it and weigh it down. So you need to find something that will fit over it and sit flat against it. I'm going to use this bowl. When it comes to weighing it down, there is no need for a very heavy weight. I'm still going to use my large cast iron combo cooker. It just fits well over the bowl and it is plenty heavy of course. To cook the breads, I'm going to use my small non-stick pan, and of course we'll need scales for weighing out all the ingredients. We'll need the dough scraper for mixing the dough, need a brush for brushing on the butter, and a rolling pin for rolling out the parathas. Ideally, you want to grind your spices, and a pestle and mortar works great for this job. If you don't own a spice grinding device, then use pre-ground spices. But when it comes to the curry, it needs to be nice and smooth, so you will need a blender or food processor. I'm going to use my NutriBullet. I could make smoothies with bricks with this thing. It is scary powerful. Definitely overkill for this job. That is what I have, so I'm going to use it. Those were all the ingredients and all the pieces of equipment required for these recipes. Let's start working, and the first job is to make the cheese. Pour the milk in a pan, set it up on medium to high heat and bring it up to a boil. Couple of things to note when boiling milk: the hotter it gets, the more it will try to stick to the bottom of the pan, so mix it occasionally. Secondly, if you let it boil without paying attention, it will boil over. Once you see the milk bubbling, turn the heat off and pour in the lemon juice. Give it a good mix and the milk should start separating straight away. And just a few seconds later, we can clearly see that the whey and the curds have split up. As soon as that happens, we can strain it. Make sure that you're using a large enough bowl underneath the colander. We're using 2 liters of milk, so use a 2-liter bowl as a minimum. Paneer doesn't need to be weighed and pressed down as much as the Latvian cheese that we made in the first episode, but you still want to figure out a good setup for the process. I'm using my glass mixing bowl. My colander fits in that bowl in such a way that it doesn't touch the bottom of it. When covering the curd with the cloth, lay it down flat over the cheese. Do not bundle it up too much, otherwise it's going to leave an indentation. When it comes to placing something over the cheese to press it down, try to use the best fitting thing. For me, it happens to be the second glass mixing bowl I sometimes use in my videos. When it comes to weighing down, you don't need to go as heavy as I did. Filling the top bowl with water would be sufficient. But here is my janky setup in all its glory. The pot is resting against the corner, touching the walls on both sides so it doesn't tip over. So if you're going to use something heavy, definitely rest it against something. The cheese is not going to take very long to set. No more than an hour will do it. And straight after cooling down, we can cut it up into little cubes, ready to be added to the curry later. Later on I realized my cubes were slightly too big, so I cut each cube in half again. Okay, let's leave that in the fridge for later. Let's move on to making the dough. I weighed out the amount of liquid that I needed and I placed it in the freezer to cool it down sooner. Hot whey may make the dough a little bit too sticky. Of course we don't need to worry about temperature control in this recipe because the dough is not fermented. It is just for handling purposes. The process here is extremely simple. Dissolve the salt in the whey, add the flour and mix it to the dough. Right after mixing, weigh the dough and divide it into 8 equal pieces. We're making 8 parathas. They will be around 20 centimeters or 8 inches in diameter, and they do not need to be any bigger. They are quite hearty. The breads and the curry would probably feed 3 people, but if you're as greedy as I am, they only get 2 portions out of it. After dividing the dough, shape it into little dough balls. Flatten the piece of dough, fold the edge over the middle, going around in a circle until you reach point where you started. Then flip it smooth side up, tighten it against the table, and that's your dough ball done. Or just get them to make themselves, regardless of how you do it. After shaping, pop them in the fridge for 30 minutes to cool down. This resting step will help develop the gluten and it will make the dough a lot easier to work with. Okay, now's the time to create the layers. Take a dough ball, dust it generously with flour, and then roll it out as flat as you can. This is about 10 inches or 25 centimeters in diameter. After rolling, brush a nice even layer of butter on the dough. And here comes the fun part, the creation of the layers. Take the dough by one edge, lift it off the table, and then slowly place it back down while swinging it back and forth. You want the folds to be not more than 2.5 centimeters or 1 inch wide. After folding, turn the dough on its side so the creases are standing vertically. Next, roll the dough up into a snail shape. Then take the loose end piece and tuck it underneath the roll. And finally, flatten the roll in your palms so it doesn't come undone. Before we roll the dough again and cook it, it must chill down for at least another 30 minutes. I made mine a whole day ahead of time, as I did with my curry base. And that is the next job. Grab your spice grinder or pestle and mortar and add all the whole spices to it. I also like to add the salt at this point, as I feel that it helps with the grinding process. Now grind the spices to a smooth powder, and then add the pre-ground spices, mix them in too. Usually an Indian base gravy would only contain part of the spice mix, and that is because the base can be used to create various curries, which can be flavored with other spices later on. But we're just making one curry, so we're gonna add all the spices at the same time. It just makes the process more efficient. Okay, that's our beautiful fragrant spice mix done. Let's move on to the next step, which is cooking the vegetables. Add the butter to the pan, place the pan on medium-high heat, leave the butter to melt, then add the onions, the garlic and the ginger. To get rid of the bitterness of the onions and the garlic, we must cook them until they're nice and soft and golden brown. This will take around 10 minutes. Stir the mix occasionally to ensure that it doesn't stick and burn. Okay, it's been about 10 minutes and the veggies are looking great. And the smell is fantastic, a good sign of things to come. The next step is to add the spice mix. Stir it in real quick and let it cook for around 1 minute. The spice does love to stick to the pan, so keep an eye on it. Okay, about a minute later, add the tomatoes and the cashew nuts. Cashews are there not only for flavor, but they also give the sauce a nice creamy texture. Bring the mix up to a simmer and keep cooking for another 10 minutes. And this is what it should look like once it's done. Blending up boiling hot ingredients is pretty dangerous, especially if you're going to use a Nutri-Bullet. So I left the mix to cool down for 15 minutes before moving on. If you think that your mix is a little bit too thick, you can add some whey at this point. I didn't need to do that this time. And there you have it, that's how you make a great curry base. This will work great with many ingredients. You can swap the protein for any protein that you like. Chicken, eggs, tofu, add some more veggies to it, it's up to you. Okay, let's make these parathas. Take one of the rolls, dust it generously with flour, and then using the rolling pin, roll it out to about 20 centimeters or 8 inches across. To ensure that the flatbread is nice and round, turn it after every time you roll it. And it would be great if you owned 2 rolling pins, because you could get someone to help you with this. I mean, you have to earn your dinner somehow, right? You can stack these bad boys on top of each other without worrying about them sticking. Unless your kitchen is extremely humid, then I would suggest dusting with some flour. Okay, in the hot pan they go. And I'm cooking these on medium to high heat again. Place the paratha in a dry pan, and then brush the top side of it with oil. After 30 seconds, flip it around and brush the other side with oil. This method prevents them from becoming too greasy. The total cooking time of this bread will be around 2.5 to 3 minutes. You want to keep flipping it every 30 seconds or so. Once it's nicely browned on both sides, it's ready. As soon as they come out the pan, stack them on top of each other. There's no need to cover them like a tortilla, because they won't dry out as much. They are quite buttery. But if you want to keep them for later, leave them to cool down and then cover them. I'm eating them in a minute, so I'll leave them on the side and finish the curry. Scoop the curry base into a pan, adjust the consistency using some of the leftover whey, place it on the cooker on medium to high heat and let it come up to temperature. Once it starts bubbling, add the paneer, mix it in and leave it to heat through. And again, at this point you could add anything to this sauce and it would taste great. You may have noticed that we didn't add a couple of ingredients to this recipe yet. That'll be the double cream and the fresh coriander. Those are added right at the end. The cream is optional. You don't need to add it if you don't want to, but it does make the whole thing extra creamy. But that is about it. We are done here. That's how we make paneer, paneer butter masala, and paratha. And all of it is tied together with the same ingredient, which is milk. Out of all three cheese and bread projects, this one must be my favorite. I just love Indian food. It's hearty, it's filling, it's extremely flavorful. And if you think that vegetarian food is boring, then you should definitely explore some Indian dishes, just like this one. So what do you think of these recipes? Have you ever tried something like this before? Let me know down in the comments. You want to see videos like this one? Click over here. Subscribe to the channel, click right here. That's all I have for you today. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one.